everybody, this is Gerald with Welding Classroom. I'm going to go ahead and continue the video on the AWS Book of Specifications in Clause 2. We're going to start off here in paragraph 2.3, Visual Acceptance Criteria. So when you're inspecting the replicas and the context is made in your question about structural, then more than likely you're going to have to go to Table 1. Knowing where Table 1's at, even though it's a little bitty book, can be helpful. Knowing what it has in it, that kind of stuff is very important. So, Table 1 has the verbal description or the written description of the acceptance criteria. We'll scroll down to it. Notice that each of the individual structural categories are over here on the right. Make sure you're aware of those in the question and where you're lined up as far as where the X is at. That indicates that it applies. So cracks, regardless of size or location, that's one you can probably stick in your memory for any of the applications, be it structural in 2.0, pipeline in 3, or pressure piping in 4. Weld metal base metal fusion applies to all the categories within Clause 2. Crater cross section, the craters have got to be filled up except for the ends of intermittent fillet welds outside their effective length. If a intermittent fillet weld is detailed or required to be, we'll say 2 on 6, and the fillet weld is 2.5 inches long, and all of the weld size is correct except for what's in the crater, and the crater is less than 1/2 inch in length, as long as you've got 2 inches of good weld, that crater does not have to be filled. But if that crater falls within the required length of weld, then it has to be filled sufficiently to provide the specified weld size. So let's just say that you've got a fillet weld that's required to be 1/4 inch. Most of it's 5/16. In the crater's unfilled, but the crater is filled enough to provide the required length, then that's okay. You don't reject it just because the crater's unfilled. If the crater's not filled completely flush with the essential flat profile of the fillet weld, but it is sufficient to make the weld size, then it's good. Weld profiles in conformance with 2.3.1, we'll look at that in a minute. Time of inspection, this applies to all the different categories. Notice that it's for specific materials, so you will have to know what those materials are, and that should be provided for you in a question, and of course in real life you should know what the materials are also. But that inspection is not performed less than 48 hours after the weld is completed. You can't do it any sooner. Well, you can't do it any sooner and accept it. Undersized welds. Size of a fillet weld, any continuous weld may be less than the specified nominal size. Notice this says in any continuous weld. Therefore, this allowance, in my opinion, does not apply to intermittent welds. Be glad to be straightened out on someone's opinion of that. That's the way I read it. So if the specified nominal weld size is less than or equal to, the little left arrow with the underscore means less than or equal to. Right arrow with the underscore is greater than or equal to. But anyway, if the specified nominal size is less than 3/16 of an inch, then the amount that you can be under is less than or equal to 1/16. Then for 1/4 only, less than or equal to 3/32, and then 4 greater than or equal to 5/16. It can be undersized up to 1/8. So undercut, this is the first one that we get to that only applies to a specific category. Go up here. It lines up with statically loaded non-tubular connections. That information will be given to you in a question. This is the only condition that applies. Material less than 1 inch thick, undercut shall not exceed a 32nd. Equal, for material equal or greater than 1 inch, shall not exceed a 1/16 for any length of weld. Now if you're someone that's used to using D1.1 and you know what it says, understand this is different. You got to look these things up when you're taking your test. Next category, it applies to, or next condition applies to both cyclically loaded non-tubular connections and tubular connections for all different types of loads. Undercut shall be more than 0.01, that's 10/1000 inch deep when the weld is transverse to tensile stress. So you've got to know some conditions. And of course on your test questions that will be provided to you if it's needed. For all other conditions, 1/32. So if it's a primary member and the weld is transverse to the tensile stress, no deeper than 0.01 inches, 10 thousandths of an inch, which you should be able to look it up, or you should know it, is actually less than 1/32. For all the other conditions, a 32nd. Move on down to porosity. That's another one where, the conditions vary depending on the application. We're not going to scroll back up there and look at them. You'll have your book out and you can look at them. But same thing to keep in mind, this only applies to butt joints transverse to the direction of computed tensile strength. They shall have no visible porosity. For all other groove welds and for fillet welds, the sum of the visible porosity, 1/32 of an inch or greater in diameter, shall not exceed 3/8 of an inch in any linear inch of weld. Now, look, if you'll notice, if you're used to using D1.1, there's no reference to piping porosity or any category of porosity, period. So if it's elongated porosity, like the worm tracks, that's considered porosity. If it's piping porosity where it extends down, then that's what I doubt you'll have any piping porosity type situations where you're going to have to measure the depth. So for the other categories, frequency, porosity, and fillet welds shall not exceed 1 in each 4 inches of weld length, and the maximum diameter shall not exceed 3/32. Notice there's an exception. Fillet welds connecting stiffeners to webs. The sum of the diameters of the porosity shall not exceed 3/8 of an inch in any linear inch of weld. And the next category, CJP groove welds and butt joints transverse. So it's a condition. That's where you've got to know a condition. To the direction of the computed tensile stress shall have no porosity. And then for all other groove welds, the frequency shall not exceed 1 in 4 inches of length, and the maximum diameter shall 3/32. So essentially, what's talked about here in B is fillet welds for these two categories over here on the right. And what's talked about here in C is for groove welds, these two categories over here on the right. Okay, so these have specific context that they apply to. These categories and fillet welds. These categories and groove welds. Up here, both fillet and groove welds are addressed for statically loaded structures. Go ahead and jump back up to the paragraphs. Weld profiles shall be in accordance with Table 1, Table 2, Table 3, Figure A, Figure B, except as noted, except as otherwise allowed. So we'll read these unless otherwise specified. Otherwise specified means something else has to address it. The faces of fillet welds may be slightly convex, flat, or slightly concave, as shown in Figure B. Exceptions for intermittent fillet welds, except for undercut, as allowed by this specification. The profile requirements of Figure B shall not apply to the ends of intermittent fillet welds outside their effective length. So essentially, discontinuities that are outside of the effective length do not have to be interpreted or measured, except for undercut. If undercut is outside the effective length, then it still applies to the exceptions criteria. 2313 groove welds. The groove weld reinforcement comply with Table 2 and Table 3. Welds shall have a gradual transition. Now, deciding what a gradual transition is, good luck. Okay, it just is what it is. I don't think you'll be questioned on any of those, but maybe you will. You'll just have to use your judgment. I see smooth and gradual and workmanlike and that type of stuff. Those are hard to define. Overlap. All welds shall be free of overlap. Okay, no measurement required. And one of the ways you can check for that is just shine a light down on the surface of the plate. If the weld metal can make a shadow, in my book, it's overlap. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here, and we'll go over the requirements for the weld profiles in the next video. Have a great day. Appreciate you listening.